Welcome to the BioAlabama Faces of Science series, where we, the BioAlabama interns, chat with bioscience professionals about their journeys from academia to their careers. I'm Brooke Bailey, and today I'm talking with Dr. Rebecca Vaught, the founder and CEO of Van Heron Labs.
So let's begin by you stating what your name is, the current title of your role, and the organization you work at.
Sure. So I'm Rebecca Vaught. I am the founder and CEO of Van Heron Labs.
And can you describe what your organization does?
Yeah, so we use genetic information to figure out what nutrients cells and organisms need. And by doing that, we can really boost their performance. And so what we've built is a ubiquitous, the word is called a bioplatform that can be used for a lot of different things. So we can enhance performance of any cell or organism type across a lot of different industries and use cases to make a lot of impact in the world in the areas that we feel most strongly about improving.
Yeah, that's incredible. And what does your normal workday look like?
Yeah, good question. It's different all the time. I actually share a lab space with another company. And so I kind of have to take shifts on the infrastructure with them. So I usually come in and do the very early morning shift. So I'm usually up by 6 a.m. in the lab by 7, and then done with all my lab work by about 2 p.m., come home and then start doing all the non-lab work things. So all the CEO stuff, kind of behind the desk work until into the evening. So usually that's what my day looks like. As far as schedule wise, but in a given day, no 2 days are identical. So I do a lot of different things depending on where we're at with our clients, depending on what's going on with R&D in the lab. So if we did this interview 2 weeks ago, I would have been slammed busy trying to get one of our formulations out the door for a client. And then this week we've actually wrapped all of that up, and so we're back to focusing on the company's R&D and working on projects that we, not to say we don't care about client projects, but working on some of the things that we feel strongly about and want to further validate and put efforts behind in the lab in order to continue to build our technology and continue to build out the company.
And you're the CEO of Van Heron Labs. How did you find yourself in your role?
Yeah, by necessity. So I had the idea behind the company when I was in graduate school during my PhD. The idea behind VHL is not what I did my graduate work on, but it's in an adjacent field. So I focused a lot, especially in the first 2 years of my PhD, on aging and longevity. So I was looking at it from a genetic perspective, but there were a lot of people that were looking at it from a nutritional perspective. And the idea behind the company is kind of how to merge those two things together. And so I knew at the time, either the sort of hypothesis that now the company runs off of, it could have been the basis for a postdoc. I could have essentially made a career out of it in the academic space. But I knew that I needed to work on a lot of different model systems, a lot of different cells and organisms. And that's very difficult to do in an academic setting, because usually what you have is a model system that you can manipulate that helps you prove whatever hypothesis it is that you're looking at. So your model system that you're working in is not supposed to be dynamic and changing. You're supposed to command the system so that the variables that you're changing directly have to do with the hypothesis of interest. You're not supposed to be learning new models and working in different fields all the time. And I knew that that's what I was going to have to do to build out Van Heron Labs. So I pretty much decided almost immediately after I had the idea behind the company, I knew that it could be hugely impactful, but I also knew that I was probably going to have to leave academia in order to be able to do it and really start my own company.
So do you have a favorite thing about your role, or what are you most passionate about in your position?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, Van Heron Labs is like my own intellectual playground. So anything that I'm interested in, I get to, spend time looking into that or solving that particular hard problem. So In that sense, it is kind of fun to be the boss and say, okay, well, we're going to work on, you mentioned astrophysics. We're going to work on, VHL in space. What does that look like? What would you have to have? Who might be willing to, what grants are out there? What funding bodies might be willing to pay for this? Where are the pain points? That sort of thing. And so in that sense, it's really, really fun to be able to decide what problems we're going to solve with the technology. So that's definitely my favorite thing about the role is that I get to, run my own R&D shop, basically. We get to pursue crazy ideas and also not so crazy ideas that are, that have a big impact for humanity and for, ecosystems at large and that type of thing.
So obviously you've been at this for a while. You've come a long way to be where you are right now. Do you have a challenge that you had to overcome, potentially one that you didn't foresee?
Yeah, I mean, it's been challenges all along the way. Just to give some background, so this idea where I had my own intellectual property and started a biotech company from scratch without ever raising money, that's only been done in the biotech space a handful of times. So usually the way biotech companies get started now is either they have like it's the typical is that there's university IP that's being licensed and spun out. So a lab or a researcher at a university has created something novel or built out a research program, and then folks that are that have the business side of that really ironed out, that really know the life cycle of something like a drug or a diagnostic, they commercialize that technology and they turn it into a business. What is much less popular is what I did, where I had an idea and I turned it into my own company, and I did not have any formal business training, and also the fact that we bootstrapped it from the beginning until we ended up in revenue. So not only did we start it from scratch with independent IP, we funded it all ourselves until we ended up in revenue and physically sold a product in the marketplace. So that also is extremely rare. And I actually can only think of one other person off the top of my head that I know that's done it. There probably were others out there, but yeah, it was extremely challenging to do that. Usually it takes a couple $1 million to get a biotech company off the ground. I think the average seed round is somewhere between 2 and 7 million. So, and we did it with 25K, and then continue to put our current revenue back into the company. So, the technology itself also needed a lot of R&D and development to really make it impactful. So I didn't necessarily know what I was doing very well in the beginning with a lot of the chemistry aspects, because we're adding it to cells and culture. So a lot of that stuff had to be ironed out in the beginning, and then also the business model that surrounds our company is a very new business model. So because we're a bio platform, ultimately what we do is we work with customers that have some sort of organismal or cellular system, and we are working with them to develop a formulation that's going to enhance how that system works and their yields and things like that. So a lot of basically business 101 is you make product, you sell product for specific price. When we go into a contract with a customer, all of that is on the table. So how we execute a project, how much the project costs, how we get paid. It's a very fluid business model. And in fact, when we apply to a lot of pitch competitions and accelerators, people have never seen this before. And when you say, we don't know how much our product is going to be, it could be a $200,000 project, it could be a $200 million project. All it throws up are red flags. But the reality is that in 2022 all the way up until 2050, you're going to start seeing these types of businesses and these business models more often. But in these early days, customers and also mentors, folks that are mapping out a lot of the traditional infrastructure, things like accelerator programs, incubator programs, they don't know how to react to this, and they don't necessarily know how to mentor you and help you along that journey. The big granting or the big funding agency, which funds startups in the life science space, SBIR, there's kind of a running thing in the background where if you have this kind of business structure that we have, don't tell them that. Come up with a different story to be able to get that grant funding, because you're not going to get funded. And so everything about VHL has been a challenge, from the science to how we execute the business model. But it just happens, it's because we're a very innovative company doing something that nobody's ever done before. And so we're taking on a lot of those growing pains. And then couple that with the fact that we bootstrapped it, and all of those other nuances. But I think it's been great. I've really grown as a scientist. I now, I came from a pure academic setting. I didn't know anything about business. I feel like I've done a self-funded MBA now, and can sometimes mentor folks who are younger than me. But yeah, to get back at your point, it's been a very interesting roller coaster to date.
So you mentioned having the idea for this company while you were doing your graduate study. Can you elaborate on what your academic journey looked like? Like, did you always know that you were going to go into bioscience?
No, so I always knew that I loved science, but I was very ADD. So I did my bachelor's degree also in microbiology at Auburn. The degree was actually called molecular cell and microbial biology. And then while I was doing my degree, I wanted to do something completely different from micro. So I did, I was in a lab with Scott Santos working with Justin Howard, and we were doing a lot of evolutionary ecology, physiology, evolutionary genetics, looking at endemic, mostly crustacean species, but some other types of marine species. And then I started in my, I guess it would have been really end of my sophomore year at Auburn, I started to really nerd out on mitochondria and mitochondrial biology, because, that kind of merged. Mitochondria are the remnants of bacteria. And so it kind of brought that micro angle in, and then sort of was relevant to some of the things that I was doing in the lab, working for Scott and Justin. And luckily there was a special topics class at Auburn, actually 2 special topics classes that I took, one on the human side and then one more looking at natural populations in the context of mitochondrial biology and mitochondrial disease. And I just thought it was fascinating. And so I went overseas to a university called Monash and studied the interactions between the mitochondrial genome and the nuclear genome. And so I never had any plans to necessarily end up in biotech. I didn't know anything about it. The evolutionary ecology, that sort of space is so far removed from biotechnology. It is insane. I really had zero exposure. But I also knew that I didn't think I was going to stay in academia forever. I thought I might do a postdoc. And in fact, I was sort of planning on doing one around the same time that I had the idea behind Van Heron Labs. I actually had an incredible opportunity to potentially go to England and continue to study mitochondrial physiology with a very renowned scientist, and also someone who is a friend of mine. But it was right at around the same time that I had the idea for VHL, and my significant other was tired of living overseas, and he didn't want me to drag him to England, which was probably ultimately a good thing because we would have been stuck there in COVID. And so came back home and created the company. But I was also very lucky that one of the big drivers that kind of opened up the door for me to do this is that my co-founder and also several of my college friends were living in Houston in the Texas Medical Center. And the Texas Medical Center they have a huge emphasis and a huge ecosystem around life science innovation and biotechnology. And they were getting really plugged in with that ecosystem, not just plugged in. They were involved with this organization called Inventure that was really a grassroots movement to build up, there's a lot of different aspects, but build up the life science innovation space within Houston. And they were, basically founding members of that organization and made a lot of the moves. So I was kind of watching them from a distance, knowing that I had this idea and that I wanted to pursue it. and then, kind of have them as like role models or this beacon, like, look, there is this other world out there. You did your PhD in something very different, but your bachelor's is the same as these guys, and they're out there doing it. So can you. And yeah, that's basically what happened. I wrapped up my PhD, went to Houston to the Texas Medical Center, met up with those guys, got hooked up with their accelerator program in the TMC, and then Alec, which is one of my friends that I'm mentioning, ended up being my co-founder, and he's still really my right hand to this day. So that's kind of how I fell into this.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So just two more questions to wrap us up. As you reflect on your professional journey and where you are now, what is one of the biggest lessons that you learned that shapes how you are today?
Good question. Biggest lessons that shaped how I am today. I think just overall resilience. When you've been in science, like experimental science, where you have a hypothesis, you're running an experiment and you're testing it, and you've just been inundated with failure for a decade, you just become very resilient to things not working out, and just accepting that is how things work within this space, I think makes you more adept at doing something really difficult, like running a biotech company. And in fact, I can say with absolute certainty that running VHL as the only full-time employee is 7x easier than graduate school, and it's even easier than me doing my bachelor's degree. And the reason why is just because you get conditioned to things being hard over a long stint in science, which I think is different from a lot of other majors where, I don't want to pick on anybody. I don't want to pick on any disciplines, but like in other places, you get the assignment. As long as you do the research on the assignment, you're going to make an A, or you're going to make 100, or you're going to get paid for that job. And things are going to work out. And science is not like that. You do everything you can, and then it still fails. And then you have to assess what happens, because you're working on the edge of knowledge. And so I think that's what makes folks with a STEM background or STEM training very lethal within the innovation space, is because we're used to testing assumptions, them not working out, regrouping, and then trying again, and not being discouraged, and just being very you just accepting that this is part of the game. So I think even though it nearly killed me and I gave up my 20s for my formal academic training, it definitely did make me the person I am today, where it's everything is kind of water off a duck's back, right? You don't get discouraged, you just keep rolling, because in the startup world, there is so much rejection and negativity, and things are worse more than they are, things are bad more than they are good. And so you have to be not just comfortable in that space, you have to be able to thrive in a space like that. And I think it's difficult, and I feel very fortunate to have had the academic and the STEM training that I've had, that I think makes me somewhat effective at rolling with the punches.
Yes, and along those lines, if you could give a piece of advice to students or young professionals, what advice would you give?
Yeah, I've been asked this question a lot, and I think the biggest thing for me, or the thing that where I see folks being really unhappy, is when they're not pursuing their interest. So I think a lot of people look at me now. I'm in a position that society really gets excited about, a female biotech founder running her own company, but it wasn't always like that. I used to be like a huge nerd. Definitely nobody was interviewing me when I was working on shrimp. Nobody was interviewing me when I worked on Drosophila. And so I've always just pursued the things that I was interested in, to the, I always ran after the things that I was most interested in, rather than pursuing things because they had prestige, or because I was trying to make my parents happy, or whatever, something you're going to get paid more money. Like I've always just gone after whatever it is that I think is most interesting, and that's the most motivating for me. And now I've ended up in a place where, you're in the prestigious zone, I guess, if you want to categorize it like that. But yeah, it wasn't always like that. I kind of got bullied for some of the research areas that I was working in. But I definitely wouldn't change it. And I think ultimately, because I've always pursued my interests, it kind of comes back to that thing where VHL is my own intellectual playground now, because I am pursuing a lot of the things that I'm interested in, and that brings me a lot of happiness and fulfillment, and it also makes me better at my job. I think at the end of the day. So that's what I would say is just do what you want to do, and don't worry about what anybody else thinks or the expectations that they have for you. And I think a lot of times in the STEM field, you're facing a lot of social friction. When you are going after a research field that folks, when you explain it to them, they don't understand. You're in the library studying late hours, and your friends are all out having fun. It's hard to go up against that social friction. And so I would say, just keep going. Just do what makes you happy at the end of the day. And, you have an incredible opportunity, if you do that, to have a rewarding career at the end of the tunnel.